Hey there, thanks so much for joining us today for this webinar with Antonio from Glovo. Really excited to be talking with you all today and to give you a chance to hear what Antonio and his team is up to. They're doing some really interesting work, and I think you're going to find some great insights from it. So to start us off, Antonio, could you just give a little background about yourself and maybe even Glovo as a whole?
Yeah, sure thing. Well, first, thanks for having me. And yeah, well, as you mentioned, I am the cash risk manager or cash and fraud manager in Glovo. I've been here for a couple of years now. Now it's my Glovo birthday in some weeks. And yeah, like
That's
here in
exciting.
Glovo, yeah, it's a milestone in Glovo, we're not that old yet. And
Sure.
starting from my profile, I would say I started working like around 10 years ago as a consultant and audit in financial services. And yet 2 years ago, I was looking for another challenge, and actually Glovo was looking for someone. They reached out. It looked like the perfect fit so far. And yeah, I joined Glovo within a process of expansion of the company, trying to get more serious about stuff, right? Glovo was this big startup that was growing crazy. And at some point, some things had to be set in place and process and so on. And they were looking for this kind of consulting audit kind of profile. And that's what I've been doing so far, trying to set grounds and standardize process. And well, my job description means to do everything related to cash operations. As you might know, in Glovo, we are competing against big players like Delivery Hero, Uber, and so on. And we're operating in markets that are kind of exotic compared to the big markets worldwide. And that meant that we had to operate in cash in order to be successful and to make it work. And operating with cash meant some risks. And well, the goal was to minimize those risks as much as possible. Right? And for Glovo, well, Glovo is almost 6 years old now, I would say. It was founded 2015. And well, it's a Spanish-based company from Barcelona. We started growing to the, let's say, nearby markets, Italy, Portugal, Poland, and so on. And then the other big players were expanding to the big markets, and we started to diversify also expanding into LATAM and also EMEA being also Africa, but CIS and Central Eastern Europe. And yeah, we've been in this pursuit of growing. We became like the second unicorn in Spain a year and a half ago, or less.
Nice.
And yeah, now the goal, I would say, is to solidify our position in the markets where we're present today. And yeah, that would be it.
Yeah, thanks for that helpful overview. So I think it's interesting. We can dive into a couple areas there, but you mentioned part of what you were doing is, the company's in rapid growth stage, and part of your role is to take that almost consulting mindset in an internal way and think about how to set up better processes. How do you think about trying to take maybe what's unstructured or sometimes chaotic and putting in structure to that?
So it's a hustle or a fight, right? I would say. I came to a company that it's very ops oriented, very hands-on. Gas is one of our core values, I would say, and sometimes it's let's say a fight between what's efficient on the long term or what's to be done on the short term. And my job was to try to change the mindset of relevant stakeholders and even the team into this long-term view, right? To do things that are scalable, to do things that are right for the company. And that even though it not solve the problem today for tomorrow, it might take more time. We should be setting the grounds for something better, right? And even today, after 2 years, we're still having those kind of debates wherever if it makes sense to do something hacky and fast or solid that it would take longer, but scalable, long-term, and more efficient.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know I'm thinking about similar things. How do you think about that trade-off or the prioritization to choose that short-term hack versus long-term structure?
So it's for us, at least for my team, I think my managers are aligned on this sense. The idea is to assess the cost of opportunity, right? And it took me a while to adapt to this. If it has to be hacky because the long-term solution, it will take that long that we're losing an opportunity there. We go hacky first, and then we decide to do it the best way possible. And sometimes it's a trade-off, right? I'm always bargaining the fact that we should do this or that, depending on how convinced I am that the big solution or long-term solution is going to be the one.
Sure.
And it really depends on the situation. I'm always more prone to go big scale solutions that are a one-off thing than fixing something 20 times. But it's true, and I have to admit that sometimes I've been wrong there. It makes more sense to be hands-on and do something and replicate the hacky process for 20 countries instead of doing one big process that is rock solid.
Yeah, that makes sense. Another thing you mentioned is about cash management and fraud. And I think on this discussion, we have some people who are familiar with Glovo very intimately and probably use it. And then we have some others who maybe are in a market that Glovo is not currently in. So for those who are not in a market where Glovo offers service right now, can you give just a brief overview? I know we talked about this before, the difference in how, let's say, you can take card in some and how some take cash, and what that process for cash looks like. Like, how does it go from, restaurant, courier, Glovo, that sort of
Sure thing.
process?
Yeah. Actually, think like that. Yeah. So actually, Glovo was created in a way that it was meant to work as a card-only company, right? Barcelona trying to be this city that it's a tech hub and so on, right? But as we expanded, as I mentioned, we started going into more exotic markets where cash was needed. Our processes were not ready for it. And the change was, okay, I'm just enabling cash as a payment method for couriers, for customers, sorry. Yeah, and that was it, right? That was the toggle we activated. And then we started building things to mitigate the risks that generated, because, well, this gas and hacky and hands-on process. And those is one of those cases where I would have to agree that being hands-on and do something fast, it would be better than wait a whole year to develop an app that maybe would not be completely ready until today, right? Then we started just that by enabling customer payment method cash. And with that, a whole big level of risks arise, right? And first, couriers would receive cash from customers, but in the future, couriers were also enabled to, depending on the partner, pay with cash or not. One of the things that we are super proud in Glovo is the anything bubble. I don't know if you ever used the app, but there's this bubble in the middle that enables you to ask essentially for anything you desire. Yeah, right?
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's quite nice, and you can ask for, I don't know if bizarre is the word, but you can ask for AirPods, you can ask for a phone, you can ask for with stuff, right? How do you take care of those if you don't enable your couriers to pay, right? At first, we enabled cards for those couriers for them to go to the restaurants or to the shops or wherever to buy stuff. Then we also enabled cash in that area, and we also signed partners to accept cash, because what happened is that with our day-to-day operations, couriers were accumulating in their pockets or in their balances more and more, and we needed ways to train that naturally or organically. Otherwise, it was going to be a pain for the future. And it actually became a pain, right? We started accumulating a lot, and we started losing a lot of it, because at the end of the day, couriers were accumulating in their pockets and they were churning. They were leaving after, let's say, we consider churn a certain amount of days. So they started leaving, because it's what we expect, right? At the end of the day, it's not a job of a lifetime, but
Sure.
It's a thing that it's more ad hoc, I would say. And then some couriers were leaving with 100, 200, 300, and I've even seen thousands of euros in cash in their pocket, just because someone was not taking care of it. And then, well, that's actually when my manager and I jumped in, right? And we started tackling the situation ad hoc. And yeah, we started building all these processes. One is the Box Implant one, and the other ones are more internal CRM requests and so on. And we decided this, let's say, cash life cycle of a courier. That's what we expect of the journey of a courier to be, trying to make the GX as good as possible. And to talk some numbers, when I joined 2019, I would say we were losing more than $500,000 a month in cash, just because there were no controls. And right now we're, I would say, 10 times under that at least. So I think we're moving forward in the right direction, even though we're still there to fine tune stuff.
Yeah, wow, that's such a big change. I should also mention, for those participating, feel free to add chat questions and we can answer them as we go or at the end as well. So that's a huge change. I think anyone listening is very impressed with that. What were you, so you mentioned part of this solution to fix that was using Box Implant, and we can get into that in a minute. But can you talk about if you had tried anything before Box Implant, or did you kind of go from, hey, we need a process, to let's use Box Implant's automation?
Well, so from the global cash team, I would say Box Implant was the first one we looked into, to be honest. Enrique, my manager at the time, and myself were in constant conversations with Alona since I joined, and she has been always pursuing this, let's say, deal. And we had other competitors there to choose, and we A/B tested. But from our side, we didn't have anyone before. Internally, we know that there were, and actually there are other vendors. I think it's Necessary or others. And I know that other teams are happy with them, but at the time, Box Implant looked like the more robust solution, right? It was voice bot, but it had voice recognition. The UX was good. We tried to remove this, hey, click one to reply, which from the focus groups and the A/B testing was the feedback that we got, right? We did the test in, I think it was Romania. I don't remember the base of the sample that we tested, but I think the increase, the difference of the return was quite high. I would say 50% higher versus the other competitor, just because the issue of clicking, not clicking, and so on.
Yeah.
And it was great. And since then, I'd say we've been together working on it.
Yeah, awesome. I think we've heard that from others as well, that like on a phone call, being able to verbally speak something and have that kind of speech recognition rather than press one for this, two for that, makes it a lot more conversational. So that's cool. So can you give a brief overview of how you're using Vox Implant to solve this problem, or one of the ways to solve the problem? You're kind of just touching on it on a little bit, but maybe a high level view too.
Yeah, I mean, to talk about it, let me take this one step back, right? What happens with cash is that, as I mentioned, couriers accumulate on the day-to-day, and it's a live thing, right? You cannot expect to do it every now and then. You have to be on top of it. You have to have thresholds. You have to have a proper solution, right? So what we first built was what we call the daily cash collection. This, according to some settings and thresholds and risk models, we define how much cash is too much cash, I would say, and we request couriers to return, and so on and so forth. And we have some compliance protocols behind it. Then what happens is that if a courier is getting inactive and he has not fallen under those thresholds, he's going to leave the company with that cash unnoticed, right? And we cannot even consider that fraud. It's just because we never asked them, right? And with that, we had this feeling that we had to do something. How do we do it? SMSs for a guy that has not been working with or collaborating with us for a couple of weeks would not do it. Calling, well, we don't have the manpower, or we don't want to invest the manpower on doing that, and voice calls were the solution. And that's how we decided to go in that direction, right? The idea was to have a proper robocall that enable us to contact those couriers that fall under those conditions, right? So inactive for a certain amount of days and over a certain amount of money, just because if I, as a courier, am living with €5, I would say we're good to go. I don't think it makes even sense to disturb someone for that amount. On the other hand, we want to contact all of those that are over an amount so we can take care of that.
Yeah.
And it was quite easy, to be honest.
Yeah, very cool. So when you think about creating voice bots, I think it's interesting in using these kind of outbound call automation strategies to reach these people. Was there anything that surprised you in the process when setting it up?
So, well, I don't come from a technical background when it comes to Python and coding. So for me, how, let's say, user-friendly the platform was, it surprised me. I thought it would be like this dark screen where it would take me forever. Well, to be honest, all the design was managed by Box Implant team, like Andre and Vadim helped us a lot, and Alona helped us coordinate also a lot while we built the process.
Mm-hmm.
And for me and the team, it was a matter of designing flows. Flows were easy to do it. I mean, Word document, questions, answers, scenario, and we communicated with them. And it was super straightforward. The support of the team was great. So for us, it was not a hassle. That it was like, that was what I was afraid of. Actually, this was also a pro of Box Implant versus competitors. It was that they offer this solution that it will help us customize and give us support and so on, while other vendors were like, okay, so we might be offering a, I would say, maybe cheaper price, but you have to handle all the solution yourself, which, well, it didn't suit us at the time.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. And you talked about considering SMS as the first thing you would do, but felt that wouldn't get the response rates needed. I think, I would guess you considered email as well. What made you feel that automated voice calls or voice bots would get you a higher response rate?
So, well, because we tested essentially, and we do send SMSs on a daily basis to thousands of couriers, right? Because, well, our base of couriers is quite high, and we're operating in 24 countries today. So that means that we know more or less how the conversion rate of SMSs are and so on. And the more time it takes, the less conversion you have, right? Which makes sense. And we've all been part of SMS campaigns of certain companies, and you know that the less engaged you are with that company, the less prone you are to open it. And that was the logic behind it. When also using Box Implant enabled us to do the call, and when a successful call is done, trigger an SMS plus an email, and when a call is not properly triggered, send an email. That would reduce the pricing. And that was, I think there was a no-brainer for us that we needed it, and that the solution suited what we needed.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea how you start with the call and then follow up with that SMS or email, so that you kind of get that multi-touch point, especially as you're probably sending them a link to see the detailed process for the next steps there.
Yeah, exactly. Because so at the end of the day, if we wanted to detail too much, it would take forever, right? And you can, I don't know how to put it, but you can wish to be lucky up to a point, right? But if I'm saying too many details on SMS or on a phone call, sorry, you would expect a guy to have a notebook and note everything that I'm saying. That wouldn't do it. And in every call that we say, we're sending this reminder of courier X, remember that you've been inactive for a certain amount of time, and you still carry that cash that is from Glovo's partners or from Glovo, and that we would like you to give it back. I'm sending you the details, and then you can be briefly on an SMS and more detailed on the emailing part.
Right. Yeah. And how do you think about localizing this for each country that you're in?
It's quite easy, actually. Tricky, the part of being in every country. As I mentioned, we are operating in 5 markets in Africa. We are in the Balkans, CIS. That it's not always easy. So for example, sometimes we know that there are some lines that are hard to get. Sometimes the phone line, we need to keep buying them, or sometimes we just can't have it. But this is not something your competitors can't grant either. So I think in that sense, we're on an even field. And for us, so far we didn't need to customize much the flow, right? The flow is essentially similar to everyone, translations apart. The design of the flow is exactly the same or mostly the same. And if we need to change it, we know that we can do it. But we didn't have the need yet, even though we know we can.
Sure. Yeah, makes sense. And when you were working with your manager to evaluate this project and kind of see if it was successful, were there certain objectives or metrics that you were looking at closely?
Well, so we used the bot for 2 different scenarios. One, the scenario of courier churning or being inactive for a certain amount of days. And the KPI for that is reactivations, I would say. Then the other scenario that we're using it is for what we would say fraud or fraudulent couriers or uncompliant couriers, couriers that have already fallen under the previous collection request that we sent and that never complied with it. So we send them this second level reminder. And in that case is return on investment. Like we compare vendors through the return on investment and through the total investment, right? Because at the end of the day, what happens is that you can scale up to a point. If the return on investment of a given partner is higher, but the actual conversion and the total amounts that we're recovering are lower, it just doesn't matter. You have to look at the absolute values.
Yeah. And so I'm not sure if you can share specifics or not, but it sounds like you had more reactivations of couriers and you had a good return on investment after implementation. Is that true?
So for the A/B test, so actually we did ABC test, right? So we tested Box Implant, another vendor, and the scenario of do nothing, right?
Sure.
Surprisingly enough, doing nothing also has a certain conversion, or conversion, or let's say natural reaction.
Yeah.
But yeah, the absolute values were, I would say, 50% in favor of Box Implant versus the other vendor, and I can't remember the numbers, but obviously quite higher than doing nothing. In terms of return on investment, I would say that it was more even, right? So the difference was on the absolute values that we were getting. As I mentioned, like other vendors might be economically more competitive, I would say, but the result is not the same one. So if you look at return on investment, it might look like the wise decision to go, but at the end of the day, you want absolute values, especially if you don't trigger a massive amount of calls, it will not move the needle compared to what you can recover.
Right. Yeah, totally. Very cool. So I think, using communication automation to drive results is super interesting. And what you're doing is a great example of how the on-demand industry is adopting this more. How do you think about maybe on-demand companies in general starting to use more call automation?
So I believe all of them, or the most serious of them, should be doing it by now. I don't know because I'm not in them working, right? But I know that in LATAM, Rappi, Pedidos, they do have their own automations. Maybe it's not a robocall, but they have CRM, they have processes, they are restricting, which is at the end of the goal. But otherwise, if you're not slightly aggressive in that direction, your losses are always going to be high. And the more, it's scaling up would not solve the issue, it would just make it bigger. So you need to have those controls in place. And yeah, I think it's the next step. like it's a safe. I would consider it as a safety net, right? So you have your daily processes that try to cover like the big chunk of amounts, and then you have this second level where you try to ensure that everyone is aware, apart from emailing, that they have to give it back if they are not going to collaborate anymore.
Yeah. What do you see as some of the most exciting things happening generally in the on-demand industry?
Well, I would say, so right now it feels like we're on a stage where players are solidifying their position in the markets they are, right? Some players are moving, some players are acquiring other companies, and that's incredible. We even in Glovo suffered a change in the last semester, so we sold our LATAM division and we obtained a division in the Balkans and Central European Europe, and I think that's exciting for us. Every time one of those operations happen, it's just, I would say, a bit too much. There's a lot of things to cover. You have to adapt your process to a new solution, and it's not even. For example, we're launching a market now, and you take it slowly. Things are scaling up. When you're acquiring a market, it's just a whole other thing. You go to a ship that is already going fast, and you have to put things there. You have to adapt to what the team there was doing, because sometimes that's what it takes, and sometimes you have to make them change the approach to what you're doing. The other way around, right? When you're leaving a country and you're leaving it to someone else, you have to support up to a level on what are you doing and how can they use the solutions that you're doing.
Yeah, totally. It's interesting hearing about that. I think one of the things that I've been thinking about as you're sharing is you're probably collaborating with other teams in the company a lot through this. Who are some of your key collaborators that you work with on a weekly basis?
So the main one, I would say, is the payments and fraud team, right? And this is a tricky one. We are cash and fraud, and they are payments and fraud. Obviously, there seems to be an overlap, right? But I think the ownership is clear there. So that team is in charge of everything related customer side, and we're in charge of everything that happens after cash has changed hands, I would say. And that obviously means that everything that goes in that specific area where you're expecting a customer to give cash to a courier, but at the end of the day, you cannot verify it unless someone of those tell the truth. That means that we have to collaborate a lot. They have risk engines to allow transactions that we have to support them. We have automated processes to do management on fleet or operations that they support us with, and the sharing of knowledge there is clear. We're working closely. I think we have 2-3 meetings weekly regarding topics like that, because at the end of the day, they are the main stakeholder outside of operations. And then I would say everyone within the supply operations or courier operations teams, where obviously we do a lot of stuff that might affect retention or might affect activation of couriers or the total fleet that you want, et cetera, et cetera. So we need to be relatively aligned. Right?
Yeah. I think it's so cool that something like dealing with cash actually could help with retention of these people. And so what you're doing is affecting so many parts of the business, which is great. Earlier, you talked about, no, go ahead.
No. So I just want to say that something that it's obvious when you think about it, but it was not that obvious back then. And it was the first fight I had as coming to Glovo was, if you ask to the courier for the cash, you're going to have him for longer. And everyone in the local teams, even regional teams, was against it, right? And that was the first big fight that I had. Like, okay, so guys, we need to start asking, we need to automate, we need to have compliance whatsoever, right? And there was always this argument about, but the courier is a good courier, he's delivered a certain amount of orders, he's loyal. And then it was like, yeah, I mean, he's loyal because if in his pocket he has 500 euros, he's loyal until we get those euros, right? Then when it took some time and of course friction and crashes at the beginning, but once you cleared up all this first base of, let's say, top offenders or couriers with large amounts of money, having this continuous flow of, okay, I'm asking you for this 80, 60 euros and you keep doing it and you normalize it, it makes it better, because then if you just decide every now and then to do it, and now I have 250 euros, we have talked to couriers and we know for a fact that if they have a large amount of money, they are more willing to say, well, let's leave it. I'm not going to work for Glovo anymore. I'm going to go for the competitor, let's say, and I'll keep this money.
Yeah, totally. I can imagine some Reddit threads of like, hey, found a new way to make 250 euros fast.
Yeah, you can imagine. I mean, we saw some amounts of money that were concerning at it.
Yeah, I bet. And I think that's a great point, that this actually helps them kind of build a relationship with you, and even build trust in that way. So that's cool. You also talked about earlier that you were setting up some other processes. I think you mentioned CRM processes. Can you speak about some of those other areas that are kind of complementing the voice bot calling solution?
Yeah, sure. At the end of the day, what we do is we try to act as much as we can while a courier is live, right? So it means, as I mentioned before, like the daily process that we're iterating and iterating and trying to improve and provide a better user experience, right? We are constantly adapting and integrating with local solutions around the world to provide better payment methods for the couriers. We have been working with around 20 different collection partners. And by collection partners, it can be even a bank, being the most rustic way of doing it, or even a new wallet. If anyone here has experience in Africa or Kenya, I think it's very clear. There's one e-wallet called M-Pesa, which is crazy, the penetration of the solution. And it was obvious, right? How are you going to receive the money from the couriers? Well, M-Pesa is the way to go, because otherwise you're just not being efficient. And this is one of the things that we do in the team. We try to provide those integrations to provide a good user experience for the couriers. At the end of the day, we wanted them to give back the cash. And if they have been given a good solution, they'll do it. At the end of the day, the biggest concern or complaint that we have is if the solution is not adequate. And we have experienced that in some other markets. If you decide to go with a solution that doesn't have this traction in the fleet, it's just not going to work. And yeah, those are one. And then we have all these, I would say, fleet management solutions, wherever like we can identify fraud and we can automate stuff. That's always one of those things. Actually, one of the branches of the team is mainly in charge of fraud. But when it comes to cash management, yeah, we have automations on cash requests for couriers, like these thresholds that I mentioned. Also, we have a process that enables us to, let's say, constrain couriers according to how much cash they have, so they don't receive more while they're operating. And yeah, we also have solutions on partner side, right? So these problems that we have on courier side, that couriers accumulate a lot of cash, it also happens in our partners, right? McDonald's is not one of the cases because they're treated differently, I would say, but the kebab next door, it can happen that they have earnings or a fee of 100 euros, but they have accumulated cash on 200, and then you would need to have an invoicing team that gets invoices for them, but for them to pay instead of receive, which is a friction for partners that's not what they want from us, right? They want to have smooth operations. They don't want us disturbing them. They want their orders and they want to forget about it. So we have processes to ensure that too.
Yeah, very cool. And jumping back to the calling, do you have a sense of how many people would answer the calls?
So the calls, I don't have it by mind, but last time I checked, it was, I think 65% of the couriers actually pick up the call. It depends on the country, right? We don't have it deployed globally yet. We are on the process of that. We're also acquiring some lines because we know that some markets are hard to get, but we are on it. And yeah, I would say between 60 and 70%, depending on the market, some more, some less. What it also surprised me is that in some countries, it takes let's say 2.5 tries per contact, while in some others with 1 point something, you're good to go, right? At the end of the day, 60-70 was good, and the conversion, like the total conversion rate, was around between 30 and 40. At the beginning, it was more 40. Now that it's normalized, I would say it's more around the 30-35% conversion rate. But as I mentioned, right, as we scale, there was no other way of doing it, because you cannot sustain manpower to call in every country, and it was way more efficient than the other solutions that we had in place.
Yeah. So just for everyone to hear, that means basically 30 to 40% of previously unreturned cash is now coming back to Glovo. Like that's a big boost to the bottom line of the company. That's awesome.
Indeed, because what was strange for me when I joined, right? So you had all these top offenders with, as I mentioned, right, up to thousands of euros. And you always have in the back of your mind, okay, so those are the ones contributing to the losses. And they do contribute, but at the end of the day, the vast majority of people that leave is not because of the money or so, it's because they leave, right? And I would say like the average cash balance of the guys that were leaving was 30 euros. And that obviously was, I mean, there was something that we were doing wrong if that was what's happening. And we started pushing for that. And that's why Box Implant makes so much sense, right? Because you cannot be sending SMSs on a daily basis to all the couriers that have over 30 euros, because first, the cost in SMSs would be crazy. And second of all, we didn't want to have a process that was not, let's say, severe. Meaning that if I'm asking you and you don't return it, I'm going to try to make you comply. Therefore, the threshold have to be not generous, but a bit more wide. And that's the reason that Box Implant has like a proper fit in that sweet spot between the cash collection that we do daily and doing nothing. That obviously didn't make any sense.
Yeah, that's awesome. So switching to a different question, how do you continue to learn? Are there any communities or sources that you go to for learning more about your job or about the on-demand industry as a whole?
Well, the good thing about Glovo, I would say, is that it's impossible to not keep learning. The company is growing so much, so fast, right? The groceries, let's say, fever, right? Also going into B2B, stuff like that, right? So you always have, for example, in my case, I always have to, whenever we have cash going into B2B or into groceries, so on. So we have to adapt our process, learn how they do it, trying to interact with them. So this always is a learning opportunity. And also we have like really, really good engineering teams or technical teams in the engineering side, but also in ops side. So we also learn, and we keep having solutions that keep iterating into bigger things that I didn't necessarily knew that could be done earlier. As I mentioned, I'm a, I would say, business profile into a technical team. So the personal growth that I had while working with technical profiles was great, and it keeps being great, right? The team teaches me stuff every single day, I would say.
Nice.
And that is great. And also, one of the beautiful things about Slack is that I think all companies that use Slack has this kind of industry intel channel when you learn a lot about what's going on the market, on the delivery companies, groceries, B2B, etc., etc.
Yeah, very cool. So last question here, and then we can open it up to some questions, or if you have anything else to share, we can give you the stage a little bit more. But how do you explain to your family or to people who don't work in the industry what you do?
That's a tricky one. But I learned to perfect that through time, because before I was a forensics consultant, right? And that was way harder to explain because,
Sure.
It was a bit trickier. But when I went to Glovo, I mean, I always have this storytelling, and even when I'm interviewing people, the storytelling is the same, right? So, okay, we started with card because that's what happens here in Barcelona. We do not operate in cash in Barcelona, right? So, okay, visualize Glovo as card only. Then we went to LATAM. Then we had to enter cash. and what happens there. So I am the guy trying to make sure that all that cash that goes in, we keep it and we don't lose it. But I think that's the best way to describe it. And,
That makes sense.
We keep building stuff to get that organically or not done organically, but to get that cash back.
Yeah. Yeah, I think most people could probably understand that. That's a good description.
Yeah.
Cool. So for those of you that have joined online, feel free to add in some questions in case you haven't already. I believe we got some beforehand sent in as well, so we'll look at both of those. We have one question from Will right now. Hi, great talk, guys. How do couriers use their virtual cards to buy items?
Okay, so that's not something I built, so I don't want to take the credit there. But well, how it works is, so we have a deal with a vendor that enables us to have assigned cards to profiles. And there is a model and an engine that allows an agent in Glovo to unblock that card if the card is needed, right? So allegedly, every time there's an operation that requires the card, either the card gets automatically unblocked because the process allows it, or if a courier proactively asks for it because or the integration failed at some point, or there's something in the order or in the partner that I don't know. He's supposed to have cash, but he doesn't, and he wants to use the card. An agent can authorize and unblock that card for him to pay. And that triggers a whole lot of other processes to make sure that no one abuses that. But yeah.
Very cool. Will says awesome. Cool. Another question is, someone is asking, what are the easiest markets to work in, and what are some of the more challenging markets to work in?
Okay, that's a tricky one, meaning that what can we consider tricky or harder? When we think about doing something, I would say the market where I had the easiest experience or where the team has supported me the most was Portugal, right? I don't know what it is. They always been super helpful. They are always prone to try, test, and so on. And the local team always helps. So in that sense, I would say that Portugal was great. And even the fleets adapt good to the processes. And there are fleets that generate more friction than others. I would not point out anyone specifically here. I mean, at the end of the day, we are doing cash recovery or cash overview, which is always generating a bit of friction. So some friction is always happening, but I don't think there's anything special there. And then there's the other part of what makes operating tricky, which is the legal framework. Well, in Spain right now, we're going through some turbulence. Europe is always a bit more restricted than EMEA. Back in the day, Argentina was also somehow constricted, and we had to make sure that we comply with regulations to adapt our process. Sometimes that means that we cannot deploy a process just because it would not be compliant with what the regulation states.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We have another question here. How was your experience in LATAM compared to other markets? From Alex.
So LATAM was, well, there was something there that it made easy the communication, right? At the end of the day, I'm from Barcelona, born and raised, right? And Spanish communication always makes it easier as even though we work with English speaking markets, it's always easier if I express myself in Spanish. So that was on the local side, I would say easy. Then it was tricky in the sense that a lot of things happen when you are not there. And the on-demand delivery industry needs you to be there. And that always had frictions, right? Like I was used back in the day to have Slacks at 9, 10 p.m., which was, was not the best for, I would say, work-life balance. But, but the good thing for us is that our teams there were super empowered and they were super ambitious to deliver. And that always makes it easy. But yeah, I would say that was the friction. And also fleets don't behave that differently than in Spain, I would say. Sometimes, and they were not even someone would suspect that, okay, in some countries in LATAM, you might have some fraud that is not happening in Europe. which is not necessarily true. And on the other hand, we had a good collaboration of the fleeters. So we always could ask, or it was easier to ask to the fleet for them to share thoughts on what we were deploying.
Nice. What is, someone else asked, how does the buy anything product work? Are there any constraints to it?
Yeah, of course there are constraints, right? So you cannot ask a courier to buy a car, right? Like to make it super ridiculous.
How about a Ferrari?
Exactly. Like, yeah, I don't think we can pay for those. but yeah, so what it happens is, as it's, I would say, a text box where you ask for anything, we have a way of recognizing certain words that some orders are directly dispatched and some others are fine-tuned with a team that real-time operations that checks it and decides if the order has to move forward or not. Of course, like I would say that it's always harder to maintain and operate with those orders than with food orders, just because when I'm ordering a Frankfurt or a burger, it's a partner, it's everything integrated in the app. I just click +1 and everything gets so smooth. When you're doing anything, you just depend on, okay, assigning the order that courier understands what you're asking, right? And I don't know, I ask for a bottle of water. Okay, what kind of water? These things happen, right? The contacts there are always higher. You can always face cancellations, but it's a fun one, to be honest. I mean, it's one, but it's always good to experiment with.
Sure. Yeah. Very awesome. Poro asked a question: what were some of the challenges you faced when implementing the voice bots?
So the first challenge was coordination. At the end of the day, as I mentioned, 24 markets, different time zones, and with you guys, that Alona is based in Moscow, right? And it's so handling a conversation between Moscow and Peru, it was a nightmare, right? Just because emails go back and forth, and sometimes no one is active, I would say. And even though we are all like a bit workaholics, maybe, but this is always the problem. This is the main challenge. And in specific markets, getting lines to operate with. Like, for example, we know that in Africa it's harder. You require certain documents, like in Spain, in Madrid, in Portugal, in Italy, it was super smooth. You get a line, you can trigger the calls. The testing was fine. Then, I don't know, there are some countries where users start blocking the sender, or I don't know, the email just breaks, things like this. Technical difficulties that happen when markets are more complex than what we're used to. And that has been, as of today, I would say once the product was rolled out everywhere, this is the most challenging thing. Rollout in the markets where we were not eligible for. And in this sense, I would like to point out that even though we knew that it was going to be challenging and that some markets maybe someday we would never be able to roll out, the team has always been delivering there, slow but steady. We've been operating, I would say, for 1 year now, and every month we're crossing one country out of the list, I would say, or two. And we are always having projects of new stuff. We are also launching new markets, right? So it's making Alona's life complicated, but well, that's how we keep the tension while working.
Thanks for sharing that. And Alejandro asked, are there other challenges you face in your role at Glovo as well?
Well, challenges many, right? At the end of the day, we try, from the operations team or from my team in particular, we try to be a technical team or a tech team within the operations team. And I would say you don't make an omelette without breaking some eggs. So it sometimes some teams, they feel like they have to do something that we're doing on our own, or sometimes, and this I assume happens to everyone that works in the tech industry, is that if you want product to build something, it would take up to a year. If you want to do it yourself, it would take 2 months, and you would actually break the eggs along the way. And sometimes it happens, right? Some frictions there, and the challenge is, I would say, to learn from those, get better at it, try to be as tech as we can, and try to scale our process and operations as much as we get. We are still a small company, or we try to keep the mindset of we are still young or we're still small, and we have to get better. And I'm trying to push myself and the team to get better. And if we feel like we have covered one area, I'm always the kind of boss stressed to challenge that. Like, can we do it better? And if not, okay, what else can we do?
Yeah.
And I think that's, I mean, try to keep everyone motivated, even myself, in that direction. Sometimes too pushy, maybe, but well, I think that's the way.
Yeah, very cool. And Al asked another question. What are the plans for the future with regards to your team and specifically the voice bots?
So for us as a team in cash and fraud, we still have a lot to cover. We're trying to get more and more ownership on the things that we do, and trying to be, as I mentioned, as technical as possible. This means better solutions, better UX for the people that the solution is oriented. And that doesn't always mean that our couriers have a better experience, but also means that the local teams have better visibility, or they can trigger solutions themselves, build ad hoc things for them, which is great. And that's the direction, I would say.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for sharing today, Antonio. Anything else you want to share or leave people with?
Well, no, but from my side, I think we're extremely satisfied with Box Implant as a whole. I would say the product is great, but the team helped us to do it in a way that it was great. I mean, we didn't have any pain points while building it, and I know, because my job means that we have sometimes developing something from scratch without support is a nightmare. And well, this was like the UX from our side to make it work was incredible.
Cool.
And if that's the message I have to send, I would keep it that way.
Nice. That's great to hear. Cool. Well, thanks so much for your time, Antonio. I think people have really enjoyed this. Lots of good participation as well. And hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye, all.
Thank you. You too. Bye.